Hello and welcome to Mysteries of Science. My name's Stevie and I'm the Deputy Editor of Science and Nature, the monthly magazine from the team behind The Week Junior.
And I'm Michael, the Junior Editor. On this podcast, we take a look at our favourite mysteries of science. These are the strange phenomena and bizarre events that have left scientists scratching their heads and, despite their best efforts, remain well and truly unsolved.
Today we've got a fantastic episode for you. We're going to be answering your mysteries. These are the burning, mind-boggling questions that you want the answers to.
Now, we won't be answering these alone. We've assembled a top team of experts to help us give you the answers you're looking for. So, let's dive in. This is Mysteries of Science.
So, Michael, what's our first question?
Well, here's a question that Sam Wardell asked us in an Apple Podcasts review. Could we bring dinosaurs back to life using DNA?
Oh, what a great question. Who are we going to get to answer this one?
Well, Stevie, you might remember we did a whole episode about dinosaurs in this season of Mysteries of Science, and you might remember us speaking to Cameron Muskelly.
Hello there, my name is Cameron Muskelly. I'm a self-taught paleontologist based in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a paleontology educator, so I use the fossils and what I have to educate the community on paleontology and geology. I love dinosaurs as a kid, and I'm happy to do and talk about anything that has to involve dinosaurs.
Oh, it's great to have Cameron back. Now, bringing dinosaurs back to life using DNA. That's what they did in Jurassic Park, right?
It is, exactly. Jurassic Park, one of my all-time favourite films. So, to understand whether this is something we could do in real life, I asked Cameron to first explain to us how they did it in the film.
So, the thing with Jurassic Park is they were actually using amber from the amber mines in Dominican Republic, and there was a blood-sucking insect. I think in the movie it was considered to be a mosquito, and they were using the blood from the mosquito because the mosquito was drinking dinosaur blood, and they were using the blood from the DNA, or actually from the mosquito, and they were using the blood from the mosquito to try to recreate something like a dinosaur. In the movie, they actually used frog DNA to fill in the gaps of the genetic sequence because they didn't have everything there was with the dinosaur DNA. And so they had to fill it in with other various different animals to fill in those gaps. And so they were basically splicing something together in the form of a dinosaur. And so they were using that to create the animals from Jurassic Park. So it isn't necessarily pure dinosaur DNA that they were using. They were using parts of dinosaur DNA in other various different organisms, such as the frog, to fill in the gaps. So that's what the people or the geneticists from Jurassic Park were using and doing.
Okay, so that's how they did it in the movie, but how could we do it for real?
Very good question. So unfortunately, we don't have any dinosaur DNA. DNA is a molecule that breaks down very easily depending on the temperature and the type of environment. The oldest DNA that we actually have is actually from a 1.2 million year old Siberian mammoth, and that DNA was recovered from the woolly mammoth tooth. So that's the oldest DNA that we actually have on record. Again, it's about 1.2 million years old. But anything like a dinosaur, something that's around 66 million years old or older than that, that particular sequence of DNA breaks down very, very quickly. And of course, it has to do with the environmental factors. Typically, when DNA gets preserved, it typically gets preserved in environments where the climate is very cold. So the 1.2 million year old DNA that was discovered in a mammoth in a permafrost kind of environment. And so it was a very cold environment for that kind of material to be sequenced, for that DNA to be preserved. So there is talk about a mammoth skeleton or a mammoth being actually cloned for DNA purposes. So they were actually looking for DNA and taking the DNA out of a mammoth and then splicing it together with a African elephant and trying to come up with what people now refer to as a Pleistocene park. So we can't do Jurassic Park, unfortunately, but people are trying to use Ice Age mammals because those are the particular kinds of animals where DNA is preserved in some cases, and they're using that and splicing that with other animals related to them.
We might not be able to bring dinosaurs back to life, but who knows, maybe one day we'll have woolly mammoths again.
So that's one question sorted, but how about this one? This is another question that was left for us in a review on Apple Podcasts. An atom looks like a solar system. Do you think our solar system is an atom of another whole universe?
Wow, my brain hurts just starting to think about that one. Who on earth are we going to get to answer this for us?
Well, it's our trusty friend Peter Gallivan, who answers your questions for the Head Scratchers section in Science and Nature. He's here to help.
Hello there, I'm Pete and I work for the Royal Institution. We're a science education charity based in London and we do all sorts of exciting science education stuff all around the country. You might also have seen me in the magazine where I write the Head Scratchers column, where I answer all sorts of science questions. So very excited to be here today to answer some of the mysterious science questions of the listeners of this podcast.
Glad to have you here with us, Pete. So tell us, is our solar system just an atom of another whole universe?
Unfortunately, the way that we learn about atoms in school, which is you'll see there's a central nucleus, which has protons and neutrons, and then orbiting around this are electrons. This really does look like a solar system, but this isn't actually really what an atom looks like. This is basically a kind of simple visual which helps us understand how atoms and elements behave. But actually what an atom actually looks like is quite different. So the first thing is that most of an atom is actually just empty nothingness. So if we blow an atom up to be the size of an Olympic swimming pool, the nucleus would be the size of a pea floating in the middle of it, and the electrons would be right on the edge of the pool. So most of that atom is just nothingness. And then the second thing that's different is that electrons aren't actually single dots orbiting around like a planet. This is very complicated to understand, and it's really difficult to get your head around. But basically, imagine there's a sphere around the nucleus, and the electron is everywhere at the same time there. And this is because it behaves like a wave more than a particle. This is kind of very complicated physics, but basically what this means is that an atom doesn't really look at all like a solar system.
So that's a pretty definitive no then. Now, that's not the only atom-related question that has been sent to us. Here's another mindbender from Amelia, which she sent in using our shiny new system we've just set up, where you can send us a voicemail message.
Yes, it's super simple. All you need to do is go to funkidslive.com/mysteries. Press the big red button and record your message.
Here's Amelia's message.
In my opinion, it's the best podcast ever. I love all your monster episodes, so the Bigfoot shapeshifters, Loch Ness, and your favourite Halloween creatures. My other favourites are the placebo effect, Forrest Fenn's treasure hunt, and the world's biggest hoaxes. I hope to hear more about ghosts if there is a future series. My question is, I read in a book that atoms never really touch each other, so we actually float a microscopic distance above the ground. So how do we feel things or move objects if we're not really touching them? Thank you.
Pete, I think we're going to need your help again.
So this is another fantastic question. And to think about this one, we need to go back inside the atom again. So in the last question that we just talked about, we learnt that the electrons, which are spinning around the center, the nucleus of an atom, that actually they're not just in one place, they're kind of occupying the whole space around the atom all at the same time. And these actually, there's lots of different layers of these. So these are called orbitals. And so in each atom, depending on how many electrons they've got, there'll be different layers of these orbital shapes, and they'll all be different shapes and sizes. Some will be a sphere, some will be an hourglass, but they're kind of stacked on top of each other. And so that's what all of our atoms look like. And you're right that actually most of an atom is empty space, so that seems confusing, right? Like, does that just mean that everything in the whole world is mostly empty? But actually, if we think of the forces that hold an atom together and the forces that we see when we interact with things, that will help us to understand a bit about why we don't just pass through everything and why everything isn't just invisible, because it's all just mostly nothing.
Okay, I think we need to take this one step at a time. So, part of the answer here is because of the forces that hold atoms together. So what are they?
So inside the nucleus, so that's the very center of an atom, that is all held together by a force called the strong nuclear force. And that is just what holds everything together in the center of the atom. And then the nucleus is positively charged, and the electrons spinning outside are negatively charged. So that keeps our electrons nicely spinning around. but the electrons all want to be as close to the center of the nucleus as possible. So I mentioned earlier they're kind of in different layers, different orbitals. So electrons always want to be in the smallest orbital, the one closest to the center of the nucleus. So when one of the reasons why atoms join together and make up stuff, so if we think of a diamond, that's lots and lots and lots of molecules, lots and lots of atoms of carbon joined together. They're all sharing their electrons, and that means all their electrons can be at a lower energy level, and that keeps it all nicely tight and packed together.
Okay, so that explains why atoms come together to form solid objects, but there's still gaps, right? So what's to stop your hand just going straight through a table when you go to touch it?
So one of the reasons is some work done by Isaac Newton, who was a really famous British scientist who was born in 1642, so a long time ago. And he developed what he calls Newton's laws of motion. And one of these says that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So in this case, when I'm pushing against the table, the atoms that make up the table will push back against my hand with an equal and opposite force. The main way that we experience Newton's law, this law of motion, is just when you're standing up. Gravity is pushing you down against the floor, and so then the floor pushes back up against you with a reaction force. If you think of an accelerating rocket, the rocket is throwing out loads of jet fuel out of the end of the rocket, and that makes it push up into the sky. So that's why our hand doesn't push through. But also then, if we go back to our electrons, the same thing is happening. When the electrons in our hand come close to the electrons in our table, it's interrupting where those electrons are orbiting. And because the electrons always want to get back down to a lower energy level, this is helping to push away each other and to make sure our hand doesn't just pass through the table.
So it's not just us pushing down on the table is pushing back up against us too.
Exactly. Here's Pete to sum it all up.
To summarize, basically, there's strong forces which hold an atom together, and the electrons and the electrons in every atom want to be at a nice low energy level close to the center of the atom. So by forming tight bonds with each other, the electrons go to a lower energy level, and that's why lots of things we find stay as a nice solid object. And when we push against them, the thing we're pushing against pushes back with an equal and opposite force. And that force again comes down to those electrons in our finger, and in the table we're pushing against, wanting to stay at a nice low energy level and not be interrupted with each other. So I hope that kind of answers your question. And don't worry if you didn't quite understand all of that, but it was a very tricky question to answer. And if you end up being a physicist yourself, this is the kind of thing that scientists are still trying to understand exactly how it works. So maybe in the future, you'll find out something completely different and another exciting way that physics like this works.
Amelia, if you grow up to be a physicist and find out a different answer to this question, then please do come on the podcast to explain it to us.
Our listeners sure are asking the tough questions. I don't suppose we've got an easier one.
Well, how about this question, which was sent in to us by Daisy?
I want to know why flies eat poo.
A pretty stinky question, but I know just the person who can help us with this one.
I love this question. Hi, I'm Dr. Erica McAllister, and I'm a senior curator of Flies for Fleas at the Natural History Museum in London. There's an awful lot of flies out there. There's about 165,000 species on the planet. The adults, the ones we see flying around, generally will not eat the poo either. But some of their larvae, and some that we know intimately, will eat the poo. Now, not all of them that live in poo eat the poo either. It's a very complicated thing, this. So a lot of them will live in cowpats, for example. It's a great place to live because there are many other species living in the poo, and our flies, their larvae, want to eat those species. So they're predators within poo. But yes, there are some larvae, there are some flies, the larvae or flies that eat poo. And actually, we should be really grateful of this because there's an awful lot of poo, and we need the flies and the other animals to recycle it, to convert the nutrients found in poo into nutrients back in the environment. because whether you've thought about it or not, poo's a great food source. It's come through the body, it's come out the other side, and what you find a lot in poo is a lot of nutrients that haven't been taken up by the animal that's consuming it. And they will actually poo out a lot of poo every day. For example, a cow poos out 26 kilograms of poo a day. Just so you know, humans, we only poo out about 1 kilogram a day. Elephants, 100 kilograms a day. So that is an awful lot of poo coming out that needs to be converted. So this is a great, sloppy, nutritiously rich, fantastic habitat that they can feed in, they can be protected in, and all sorts of things. So that is why some flies will eat poo.
Wow, I've never thought that much about poo before. The next time I walk past some flies buzzing around a pile of poo, I'll make sure to thank them. But what if none of that was real? What if none of this was real? Because our next question, Stevie, is, are we living in a computer simulation?
There's a few different ways of looking at this question, but how about we get a philosopher to help? So a philosopher is someone who offers views or theories on big questions that could have lots of different answers.
Hi, my name is Scott. I'm a professor of law and philosophy at the University of Michigan, and I'm the author of a recent book. It's called Nasty, Brutish, and Short: Adventures in Philosophy with Kids. And it's about the great questions that kids ask and the astoundingly creative answers that they give. And I argue that kids are some of the best philosophers of all.
So Scott Hershowitz actually wrote a Head Scratchers column for us recently, answering some of your biggest philosophical questions. So tell us, Scott, are we living in a computer simulation?
So there's a professor at Oxford named Nick Bostrom who's famous for suggesting that we might live in a computer simulation. And his argument runs like this. He says we should think that one of three things is true. Either it's just not possible to simulate worlds like ours in a computer. Maybe that's true, right? It seems like we're getting pretty good at simulating things. Maybe it's not true. Maybe we can. So he says, first, either it's not possible, or it's possible but people aren't interested in doing it much, or right, we live in a computer simulation. Now, why should we think that that's true? Well, if it's possible and people are interested in doing it, then there's probably going to be many more simulated worlds than actual worlds. And just think about like all of the simulations we have in computer games, right? So if people could simulate worlds like ours, they'd probably want to make computer game versions of it, or versions that they would use to study for science. So Bostrom says we should believe one of three things. Either you can't do it, people don't want to do it, or we're in a computer simulation. I tend to think that we can't do it is kind of my guess. I think maybe it's possible, but it would take too much energy. But my kids think that we can do it and we'd want to do it, so we live in a computer simulation.
Well, that's me convinced. I guess we're living in a computer simulation then.
I'm not so sure. All of this feels pretty real to me.
Well, dreams feel real when you're in them too.
It's funny you should say that, Michael, because our next question is, am I dreaming my entire life?
Well, this is one of my favorite questions, actually. Lots of little kids have it. My older son, Rex, when he was 4, asked one night at dinner whether he was dreaming his entire life. And this question, people have actually been asking it for thousands of years. My favorite formulation of it came from a Chinese text called the Zhuangzi, where there's a guy named Zhuangzhu who is dreaming that he's a butterfly and he's floating and flitting around. And then he wakes up and he's Zhuangzhu again, but he doesn't know. Is he Zhuangzhu that dreamed he was a butterfly, or is he a butterfly that's now dreaming that he's Zhuangzhu? And I think it's really hard, right, to answer this question. There was a philosopher named Descartes who realized that dreams seem real to us, that we're constantly fooled by our dreams into thinking that things are real. So it's really a challenge to know at any particular moment whether you're dreaming your entire life.
So what we think of as a dream could be real life, and what we think of as real life could actually be the dream. So this podcast that we're recording right now, this could all be a dream, Stevie.
Recording this podcast feels more like a nightmare sometimes.
So what have we learned? Firstly, that we can't bring dinosaurs back to life, but maybe one day woolly mammoths.
That atoms don't really look like solar systems.
And that our entire life might either be a dream or a computer simulation.
Yeah, my brain hurts.
Mine too.
But have we answered everyone's questions?
Well, we've had a lot of people asking us about ghosts and the lost city of Atlantis, but we're not going to be answering those today.
Why not? I want to know the answer.
Because, Stevie, we're going to be answering them in the next season of Mysteries of Science, Season 4, which starts on the 2nd of September. We're going to have a whole episode about ghosts, another episode about Atlantis, and lots of other mysteries too, like time travel, the pyramids, and shipwrecks.
Ooh, I can't wait. And if any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask us about those topics or anything else, then head over to funkidslive.com/mysteries to leave us a voice message. Just remember, tap on that big red button. We can't wait to hear from you.
See you at the start of September. Until then,
stay curious.
Thanks for listening to The Week Junior Show, which is made by the same people that make The Week Junior magazine. You can get a free trial of The Week Junior by heading to theweekjunior.co.uk/podcast and using the code podcast at checkout.